I'll be honest, this is actually a pretty interesting idea and a pretty interesting thought experiment. The idea of increasing game prices per generation in order to keep up with the cost as a whole. And I thought about that for a moment and I was like, well, if that was actually being done, then I feel like a lot of other people would probably not complain as much about game price increases because it generally does feel like it just comes out of nowhere. So while I think Sean Layden to some extent might be onto something here, we don't live in that parallel universe. Instead, we live in our own universe where prices have not gone up during from the PS3 and PS4 generation and only went up during the PS5 generation, considering that games around the PS2 generation were 50 USD before going into the 60 USD that we now know and are more comfortable and familiar with almost to this day. I say almost because obviously now 70 has become the standard at on the PS5. And while that's all well and yeah, like I said, it really does feel like it just kind of came out of nowhere, and that's only because a lot of us really sort of started gaming around the 90s. But the thing is that when we started gaming, we were not necessarily old enough to buy consoles, and only really sort of started to do that in the PS2/PS3 generation. And then from that point, that's kind of where most of our memory kind of really starts and ends, basically, when you really think about how much time has passed, how much money we're paying for consoles, how much money we're paying for games. The idea that, and I will forever lambast gaming with digital platforms, is the idea that just because you have a digital storefront, obviously you can charge less for the games that are being sold on the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Marketplace or whatever, but that was never passed on to the consumer in any way, shape, or form. So at the same time, we as the players have every reason to be annoyed, angry, pissed off to some extent. And with the rise of payments, other ways of being able to pay in games, like for example microtransactions, battle passes, season passes, DLC, skins, characters in gacha games, like those are all things as well that we do need to be weary of that have happened in place of price increases. But also we're thinking about a very much a big what if scenario, the idea that what if game prices went up per generation, but also the fact that we also got all this extra stuff in between. So I don't know. I'm interested in where you guys are with this, because I kind of just started this whole thing off with like a sort of a mini rant, but we're going to go into the details of what Sean Layden was talking about, who was the head of PlayStation Studios back in 2017 to 2019, something like that. So he wasn't around for very long, but he did kind of, take over, and he wasn't really the most liked or anything, but at least he wasn't the most disliked, which is where Jim Ryan kind of comes from. But with all that being said, let's get into the details of this article, where former PlayStation US boss Sean Layden says the price of video games should have been rising every generation to cover the increase in development costs. Layden, and keeping in mind that a lot of the money is currently going to suits higher up, is also something that really doesn't help matters in that way either. So it's worth keeping that in mind as well. And this was all shared on GameIndustry.biz, so this is where the news sort of originally came from. On the topic of games increasing to $80, Layden noted that the cost of premium games had stayed the same for the past 20 years despite the combination of increased development costs and inflation. I think it's because everyone's afraid, he suggested. No one wants to be the first to raise their prices because you're afraid to lose the traffic. So what do? You end up eating into your operating income, your profit margin. There were more. Okay, this one he kind of completely lost me, but hey, it is what it is. There were more sports cars in the parking lot in the PS1 era than there were in the PS4 era, because if you're selling 20 million units at $60 for something that could cost you $10 million to make, that's different than selling a 20 million units at $60, something that could cost you 160 million to make. Again, he's bringing in numbers and it's making sense that, like, hey, you know, making 10 million is one thing, making 160 million probably going to be a lot more difficult, sure enough. And there's also a conversation to be had with development costs as a whole. The fact that games probably shouldn't be as expensive to develop, you know, for that particular price that it's being sold for, and that maybe people should cut back and make smaller titles, make shorter games. Sure, we did lambast, Order 1886 for that exact same reasoning, but I feel like PlayStation was in fact ahead of their time when they did that. But again, I'm just kind of putting that out there. And according to the article, Layden said that games should have increased in price with every new generation. Yep, we already talked about that. And he said, as long as we grow, even though we're not making money, somehow we can't die. And that doesn't really work because you're making yourself vulnerable to die at any point in time. Layden said that this way of thinking has now reached a crisis point because companies have now reached a stage where they have to sell many millions of copies to make back development costs. And this comes back to exactly what I was saying earlier, the idea that, yes, like, these companies do need to cut back on the actual costs of development as a whole. Otherwise, I feel like they're just going to be completely suffering, because remember what happened with the Outer Worlds 2. Never forget that for whatever reason, Microsoft thought, hey, we're going to sell the Outer Worlds 2 for $80, but then backtracked to 70 not long after. And even the way that they presented it, it almost feels kind of like something you would expect to see inside of the Outer Worlds, in a way, from one of the corporate greedy nutbags. But he continues to say that the cost of construction is way too high. If you're going to spend over 200 million to build a game, your margins are super tight unless you can expect to sell 25 million units. And keeping in mind, 25 million units is extraordinarily difficult to do, and in fact, the only games that are able to hit that sort of margin almost sort of back to back with releases is Nintendo games. Nintendo's exclusivity strategy is working. I don't know why people look at, you know, PlayStation and Xbox and say exclusivity is like not a thing that people should be doing anymore. It's still working for Nintendo, and if it's working for them, I don't see why it wouldn't work for Xbox and PlayStation. I'm just putting it there now. The Switch is selling absolute gangbusters. People are buying tons and tons of games. There's a lot of mindshare to be had and a lot of history. As long as companies stick with these franchises that have been with them and around them for the longest time, I don't see why not. That being said, though, and of course, unless you're Rockstar, yeah, you can't expect to sell 25 million units, as I just said. I think it's only really Rockstar and even Nintendo that could really make that sort of money anyways. And also, he's also noted that they've also been very kind of moving the median price point up anyway, even if the base price hasn't been rising, thanks to the use of microtransactions, deluxe editions. And yeah, this is basically the additional stuff that I was talking about earlier. The season passes, battle passes, skins, you know, the premium currency for gacha games to get more characters, you know, stuff like that. So again, exactly the same idea applies from what I had said earlier. They said, okay, if we maintain the price and then we nickel and dime you with DLC, microtransaction, battle pass, season pass, whatever you want to call it, and try to make up for the excess there, is kind of what he's putting up, which again, I just don't agree with. And of course, the first $80 game, and probably the only one so far, is Mario Kart World, mind you. And of course, the fact that Outer World tried to get away with it. Unfortunately, they're back down due to current market conditions, which just feels very, very vague. But I'm sure that's vague by intention and comparison. But with all of that being said, though, I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say about all of this in the comments below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. I'm aiming for 500 subs by the end of the year. And with all that being said, I do upload every day, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.